Perhaps the most memorable encounter I've had with anyone.
Being able to build a fully customizable front-end customer experience for your customers, but not changing or refactoring all of the back-end technologies that your merchandising teams, your marketing teams, your e-commerce teams, your developers are using on a day-to-day basis. That is the achieving goal of Headless Commerce. It really kind of starts with the customer experience and the flexibility.
Welcome to the Own Your Commerce podcast, where leading experts, brands, and innovators reveal strategies for e-commerce growth. I'm your host, Jay Myers, and this show is brought to you by Bold Commerce. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Own Your Commerce and our very first episode of 2023. And you are in for an absolute treat to kick off this new year. There has been a ton of discussion around this movement of composable commerce. And we're seeing the likes of even Shopify, who were once adamantly against it, now trying to claim a stake in this movement with the launch of their new commerce components. And just real quick, not to worry, if the term composable commerce is completely new to you, we'll clear that up in this episode. But long before composable commerce was generally accepted as an ideal approach to building a e-commerce tech stack for your business like it is today, there were pioneers who were preaching the benefit of it and the value it brings to large retail brands. And you know, sometimes these pioneers, they were called out on social media and their ideas were disregarded and dismissed. But such is often the case with all early innovators and adopters of new technology and new philosophies. And our guest today, Thomas Mulreid, he is one of those folks. He has been preaching the benefits of composable commerce long before everyone started jumping on board. So whether you're completely new to composable commerce and if you have no clue what it is, or if you're a seasoned vet, you will get a lot out of this episode. Okay, without further ado, let's get into it. Thomas, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's such a pleasure to have you. Can you tell us who you are and what's your role at, My Planet, which is now Orium, which we're going to get into. Who are you, Thomas Mulreid?
Great to jump on, and I appreciate you having me here today. I'm Thomas Mulreid. I'm head of sales here at Orium. As of a week ago, we've changed our name. So we've been under My Planet for the last 12 years of the organization. And Orium is a services organization that specifically focuses around this movement of composable commerce. And we help specifically retailers and B2C brands make the most of both their technology and how they're hoping to scale their businesses.
We still internally at Bold, every time we reference Orium, we say My Planet, now Orium, because it's still making its, I think that'll probably take a couple weeks and then it'll just be, everyone will say Orium. What does it mean? What's the meaning behind Orium, or why the change?
It certainly is a big change. I mean, Jason, our CEO, he has 13 years of repetition to get rid of. I've got 3, so I've not shook the habit just yet. But Orium is coming from the suffix of auditorium. It really means the gathering, the place of. We've spent the last couple of years in the organization really, really narrowing in on the type of brands that we help and the type of technologies that we work on, to the point of which we really do have a new understanding of where we fit in the world. And we've recently also announced a funding round that has enabled us to continue to scale and grow and benefit the customers that we're serving. And with that, we really felt that it was the right time to, change the name that traditionally was My Planet. Jason came up with nearly 13 years ago now. So a new position and something that really fits our place and time in the market as well.
I like it. I actually didn't think about it as the auditorium. So it makes sense. If you're in the composable space, there's a composer and there's things and your orchestration coming together. It's very much like an auditorium. I think that's a really good way to think about it. I'm assuming that was kind of behind it.
Yeah, it certainly was. And another thing around this space, because it's so early in its trend, is there's a lot of education required. And really, we see ourselves as being leaders in this space in North America. And we want to help educate brands on how to do it and how to achieve it, how to get there as quickly as possible. So we're really putting our hand up to say, not only do we want to help brands achieve this, but we want to help educate a lot of people in the market around how it can be done. And right now, the place that we're gathering is around this composable commerce space. And as much as we can speak to people about it and what it is and how it could benefit their business, that's really kind of where we're focused on.
Okay, so I definitely want to get into all of that. I'm first curious, how did you get into this space? How did you come to which was My Planet, now Orium, and were you involved in this before, or did you develop this passion? You're kind of if people listening follow Thomas on LinkedIn, he's very much an ambassador for the composable movement, I would say. So where did that come from?
A lot of work probably is really where the root of it comes from. I actually moved to Canada about 5 years ago. I originally spent some time in PwC and spent some time traveling and decided, hey, Ireland is quite a small place. So let's go check out what the bigger countries of the world are doing. And that's where I landed myself in, at the time, a very, very cold Toronto, and have since learnt to maybe enjoy some more time in other countries throughout the winter and enjoy the summers here. But yeah, I spent some time in the fintech space, spent some time in the SaaS space, and then I joined My Planet in 2020 as a services role, wanting to get closer to the people that I worked with and really flex on the ability to solution with customers and the work that we were doing. At that same time, the organization, had done a couple of headless commerce deployments, which was kind of the known term back then, and we were really starting to focus in this space and turned our heads towards it. And then our good friend COVID kicked in 30 days after I started my job, which really made things interesting from an onboarding perspective. I was one of probably the first people in the world to have to go through the onboarding remotely. But then, yeah, really, as this grew out, I found, advocating for it publicly and speaking to people about it in open forums like LinkedIn, it forced me to understand it at a much deeper level. So I do post quite regularly on LinkedIn. I do speak to people quite openly about this. And really, I use it as a weapon to force myself to understand how to contextualize and speak about what it is that we do in a way that people can understand and care about it. Because the temptation of talking about technology projects is to talk about the APIs and the microservices and how everything is going to be in the cloud. But if you really back it up, the thing that you have to talk about is how it benefits business and benefits people's jobs and ultimately makes customer experiences better.
It's like talking to someone who's a motorhead and knows everything about cars, and they're talking about the pistons and everything else in the engine, and you just want to know, does it go fast?
Does it make noise when you put the accelerator down?
Yeah, exactly. Most people don't even lift the hood when they buy a car, probably. People listening that are probably in the composable space, there's people probably thinking about it, and there's people that have no idea about it. We have a wide spectrum of listeners. So how do you define composable commerce for everyone in those categories?
Composable commerce is really an evolution of the commerce space. And if we go way, way back, traditionally the use case of a commerce business was to go and build your own application natively to your company to be able to fit a use case. And then a lot of companies came to market with better offerings that are more focused on business users. So Shopify came to market and really, made it possible to be able to have an e-commerce website and do business in digital channels. And that really, really benefited the business user. And then as we evolved over time, the IT divisions of large organizations started to make decisions of going full one side or the other, as in building their own homegrown solutions or using something like Shopify to really accelerate the business users' use cases. Where composable commerce is really kicking into gear is it's separating out sections of that more all-in-one solution, like a Shopify, to multiple use cases that you can have across your experience and using multiple tools to achieve that. So in a really simple use case, you would break out something like a Shopify or a BigCommerce or even the traditional ones like a Salesforce or an Adobe, and you would instead use a content management system that is built just for content management, or a search solution that is built just for search capabilities. And by breaking out these core features of your experiences, you can achieve much more as it relates to what your teams can do with those tools, but also then the customer experiences that you can deliver by leveraging them. And really, it's just an opportunity to give your company more agility to fit your customers' demands, making sure that you don't have limitations on the technology side of your organization.
Yeah, I like that. And if I may go back to that motorhead example, as you were talking, I was just thinking, if you think about relate it even simpler to a car, There's a car that you can get that has all the factory components, or it could be essentially a composable build where you use aftermarket parts, you use a different exhaust, different tires, different whatever, and you can use the best in breed of what is the absolute best exhaust, what is the best pistons, what are the best wheels, what are the best brake systems. I'm not a motorhead, so I don't know all the best examples, but you bring it all together to create the solution that works for you. I think that example holds up.
Yeah, and I think like one of the big things that I'll translate that to is it helps you get more. So it's really a part of if you're adding parts to the factory specs, it's how do you get more out of what it is that you're using. I don't recommend, you buy all of the parts to make a Formula One car if you're just trying to go down to the shops to get milk and bread in the morning. But at the same lens, if you're trying to achieve omni-channel use cases and you're trying to expand globally across multiple different, industries and verticals, if you're running multiple brands, it's really where you're trying to do more for your organization and your customers. That's where it makes sense to buy in, the things that will enhance what you have today. By all means, the factory spec can help you do the things that you need to do, but it's when they start holding you back about your true potential, I think that's where you have to consider other solutions to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the majority of people, a car straight off the factory lot, the way the manufacturer made it is perfectly good. But for a smaller segment that demands extreme high performance in certain areas, they'll want to modify it to a different spec. So that's composable. Now, there's kind of a blurred lines, and people say headless, composable. They kind of throw the terms around. Just to be clear, if someone asks you, how do you describe the difference? How do you just distinguish between headless and composable?
Yeah, I like to separate the two. I mean, composable commerce is what we look to in the industry as the end state of truly composable technologies, being able to plug and play with different things, reducing how long it takes to test a new technology in your organization. Headless is a more traditional approach. If you look back at, the core commerce platforms of the world from the last 15 or 20 years, they typically were all-in-one solutions. You have, the product data that goes in the bottom, and then you have a product details page that shows up on the front. The same applies for the entire experience. And really what that did is it slows down how companies can create differentiated brands. Where the headless commerce use case kicks in is where you separate the content that reaches your customers from the operational tools on the back end. And the thing of which separates those is the API itself. Being able to build a fully customizable front end customer experience for your customers, but not changing or refactoring all of the back end technologies that your merchandising teams, your marketing teams, your e-commerce teams, your developers are using on a day-to-day basis. That is the achieving goal of headless commerce. It really kind of starts with the customer experience and the flexibility. Where composable commerce kicks in is where you've got a much more composable mindset to say, well, that promotions tool is doing a great job, but what if we were to test and try a new one? What if we were to see if it could give us more control to our customers and the promotions and campaigns that we're running? Let's try this one for 2 months or a year and let's spin it up. And that's really when you've achieved true composability of that timeline to implement new technologies has come significantly down, and your team are able to mature into new approaches and styles to engage their customers as well.
Yeah, and I think pretty safe to say that if you have a composable build, you probably are using a headless approach, but not all. If you're on a platform, like a monolithic style platform, you may or may not have a headless setup, like however you want to say it. It's like, so the two often overlap, but they're not one and the same.
Exactly. I think you can't achieve composable commerce without headless, but you can achieve headless without composable commerce, for sure.
Yeah, you said it much more eloquently than I did. So why?
I tend to say it 15 times a day. So practice.
Yeah, there you go. You salespeople, you're all the same. So someone listening right now is probably saying in their head, why would I want to do this? Why would I want to complicate things and stitch pieces together and build my own e-commerce platform? For the doubters listening, and I know you've been open about saying that it's definitely not for everyone. How do you respond to someone saying, why would I want to do this? It seems like a lot of extra work.
I guess there's a number of different reasons. A lot of the time, I'll bring it back to what you have in front of you. So when I look at or speak to an organization around a consideration of, say, new technologies or new project initiatives, one of the questions we often ask are, across your teams, how much pain is your technology giving you? If I look not 12 months, but 3 years out, do you feel like your business is going to be more complex or less complex in terms of how you're doing things? Because being very transparent, composable commerce or any of this type of headless commerce projects, they don't just launch in 2 weeks. The one of the key benefits of a Shopify use case is you can get live really quickly. On the flip side, the upper end of flexibility is your cap. It's really, you can launch quickly, but then you'll reach a limit. And the mindset of composable commerce is it might take a little bit longer to get there, but really you shouldn't have a limit once you are there. That's really a measuring factor of how mature are your teams, how complex is your use case, how much more growth do you have in the organization, and are you already seeing signs of your technology holding you back from achieving any of the above? And once you start to break that down case by case, you can really start to build not only an understanding of why it makes sense, but a very clear business case of how your organization will take advantage of this in the next 3 years and the benefit that you can get from it.
Sometimes the example I use is you're kind of future-proofing your business, because in your operations, if there's in 3 years a different order management software or a different PIM or a different content management that makes sense for your business or can improve your business, it's easier if you're in a composable state to swap in a new and swap out versus a complete migration to a different platform. You can just change individual components. So once you're in this environment, it's much easier than going forward. So I think I agree 100%.
It's really a case of not making up the business case to justify why you want to do it. And if you are selling in one country with one currency and one single category of products, I will be the first to tell you that, investing in a headless commerce or composable commerce strategy is probably not the thing that makes you successful. Instead, you should lean into, your offerings or your loyalty experiences or your product and your merchandising. But it really is when you kick into managing multiple brands, or you're selling in 3 or more countries at one time, or you have stores, so you need to activate omni-channel use cases. That's really where you can put your hand up. But if you are complaining that your site speed is too slow, but you don't have complexity in your use cases, I still do not recommend a headless solution to get that time to value.
Makes sense. When someone says to you, what's a great example of a composable build? Do you have a go-to?
I tend to look back to some of the work that we've done with Harry Rosen over the years. They've got the lucky advantage of having done this already. They're on the other side of their journey, perhaps, so they get to optimize and scale now that they are on these modern technologies. But they've won the Retail Project of the Year in the Mac Alliance this year. We've seen a number of talks from folks like Tovi and Ian over in Harry Rosen that really speaks to how much they're enjoying their day-to-day because they're on the other side. And a lot of it starts with the operational pieces and the core fundamental platforms that you need. But really now it's consideration of, hey, this thing looks cool. This business model is something that we strive to achieve. How do we optimize for the right experiences for our customers? How do we make sure that our customers are getting the best possible experience from our brand and the offerings that we have? I think, that's a really great example of bridging the in-store and the online and using great technologies to move fast as an organization.
Yeah, Harry Rosen's a great, and Ian Rosen, who, if you follow him on social media, he speaks quite a bit about composable commerce, which, he's a fashion mogul. You wouldn't think he would be so passionate about technology, but he really is. And he will be the first to tell you that his business is in a better position because of their technology and their tech stack and how their e-commerce is structured. And I know during the pandemic, he spoke a lot about how they had to roll out different things where their sales reps could dynamically sell to customers shopping. They were very adaptable and could move fast during the pandemic because they kind of moved to this, I think it was 2019, like just before. So they were kind of fortunate to be in a good position for when they had to be adapted. And that actually is a perfect example of when you mentioned earlier how it sets you up for future proofing and as you reach different complexity and different business pressures and you have to change things. Harry Rosen was in a perfect spot during the pandemic.
Exactly. I will stress as well, I think one of the big things that's important in that use case is retail, and how a retailer can't just consider, their homepage through to a payment solution. They also have to think about, things like inventory and different store experiences, and how do you connect the customer that's, could one day be in the Eaton Center buying, one set of clothes, but then browsing through an ad the very next day. And that the omni-channel use cases are where we at Orium really dig down into how to achieve that connected experience with a brand, and not just having these silos of information, which is the more traditional strategy for, a retailer's use case.
Do you have any examples of how other brands have embraced Composable or like started embracing it? So Harry Rosen, that's like a pinnacle shining light of like, okay, here's a brand that's done it excellent. Any others that are starting to embrace it in different ways?
There's certainly a number of approaches. And I think one of the things I'll mention in that topic is it's not the traditional mindset of, there's this terrifying word in the industry called a replatform. And every digital person, IT person, frankly, even the business users are intimidated by it because it brings on a lot of risk to the organization. In case you didn't know, if you're replatforming your website, you still have your other job on the day-to-day, which is to run your current state. So it does put a lot of tax on an organization as it relates to replatforming everything that they know and understand today. And one of the things around the Composable Commerce strategy is you really don't have to do everything at one time. It's a path and a journey to achieve Composable Commerce. It's not something that you can just, start today and launch tomorrow. So from that perspective, we often work with our customers to identify the level of lift that you take in your first step in the journey. And that really starts with understanding what is your biggest limitation or what is your biggest pain point. And the three topics that we tend to see across e-commerce specifically is around your content, the way that you're able to manage that content, change that content, appeal to your customers with it. The second one is often around the search experience or your product listings pages or your category pages. And then your third use case is around your cart and checkout and the ability to customize the cart to reduce abandoned cart use cases or add new payment options, or in many cases that we're seeing more and more, incentivized loyalty programs or couple projects with, bundled product use cases. And if you break down those three of content, search, and then the checkout use case, that's really a good way to start your journey because we're betting down or doubling down on the Composable Commerce growing in adoption and momentum over the next 5 to 10 years until it's really a known thing across the industry. And we're not focused on making it an awareness thing. The industry will figure that out. Our big mission within Orium is to figure out how do brands achieve this in a safe way with the best practices and also do it quickly and not having to wait the 12 to 24 months until this thing gets launched. But how do you see value in your first 3 to 6 months that can ultimately generate more revenue for your organization and fund the rest of the project while building the level of conviction and confidence that this Composable Commerce approach is the right thing for your organization to do?
So I just want to clarify. So when you say phased approach or it's a path, what you literally mean is if someone is on an e-commerce platform and they want to improve one specific area, like you mentioned, search or content management, they start with just that. So like they start with just replacing search, then content, then maybe checkout, then maybe other areas. But you're saying that that's generally the path to, and then eventually they are composable, but they don't just migrate and become composable. It's a block by block approach.
Correct. There's probably 100 analogies out there between Lego blocks, and you used the car analogy earlier, and it really is an adding to game of, you continue to incrementally improve. There's obviously use cases around the bigger blocks that you'll have in your use cases around things like order management or commerce engines and those lifts. But I really do recommend not trying to achieve composable commerce by buying 7 technologies in your first project and hiring a partner to go and work on it for 12 to 24 months. I think the tactical approach to starting the journey is the best way to get buy-in across your organization and ultimately help people enjoy the experience and get rid of the dreaded replatforming approach that the industry is known for so long.
So when someone decides that, okay, I'm bought in and I understand the value and I want to future-proof my business and my online strategy, where do they start?
I think one of the first areas is finding out how to approach this as it relates to your own organization. One of the things that you shouldn't do is try to do this in isolation. The IT team shouldn't make decisions on behalf of the company, or the business team shouldn't make entire technology approaches. This really has to be a company-wide effort. So step one, if I'm very honest, is have a candid conversation within your leadership team to say, what are the areas of our business that are slowing us down for growth? And once you start to understand where the pain comes from, you can start to understand resolutions that you can bring in to get that done. From there, I would highly recommend a partner. And I don't say that in a biased way. Obviously, you can call me if you need me, but I think it's really a case of understanding the speed and value that a partner can bring. Time and time again, we've seen people go out and try to do IT projects or change and transformation stuff on their own, only to miss deadlines, have people turn over, and there's one person in the organization that knew everything. Having a partner that can really document everything and reduce the unknown unknowns of a project can really reduce risk and make sure that your project's going to be successful. And then really it's understanding and aligning with your business. Your merchandisers, your marketing team, your content team, they will be the first to understand and know what they can't do, that they want to be able to achieve for their customers. They understand their customers the most. They know what they can't put in front of their customers because of limiting reasons. And once you work backwards from what you can't do, you can start to identify what needs to change very quickly.
Well, and I agree with talking to someone who's done it before and getting good advice. I think some of the questions I often hear is around when connecting the different components, which component owns which piece. So sometimes that comes to like customer data. Like we have subscription software and checkout software. And so sometimes if we're using our subscription software in something now, do we take over the customer data? Does the customer data continue to live in their CDP, their customer data platform? And do we just update their customer data there? Do we update it in a platform? Does it make sense to move it over? Like those are some of the questions that come up a lot of when it's connecting to make the right. There's sometimes not a right or wrong, both work, but what will be smarter long-term as you grow to set it up in a way that you just avoid some future headache. I find that's where a company like Orium or anyone who's been through it before can add some value.
Correct. Yeah. And I think it's really a case of not having a one size fits all. Certainly having a focus in the retail and B2C space, we see trends and correlations, but going in with an open mind to say, how does this business need to function and how does this business need to manage these, say, data flows or customer experiences, allows us to make sure that the decisions we make on behalf of the customer are going to benefit them for the 5+ years, rather than, hey, it's going to get us a project launched on time and then they'll live with it from there on in.
Have you ever seen anyone go to a composable headless stack and regret it and want to migrate back to a monolithic platform?
I've not seen them, although I'm sure they're out there. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think that there was a couple of folks out there that maybe didn't need to. One of the things that I would recommend heavily is really consider it across your organization of size and scale. Have the conversation candidly with your whole company to say, are we actually going to do this and are we ready to do this? this isn't the no code, never have to worry about anything ever again solution. It certainly does give your team more control. So I suspect a lot of this is around the change management rather than should they or shouldn't they have done it. You can't move into a new house and not know the layout before you go in. One of the things that I would stress is this isn't really a thing where somebody just hands you a new website and you start working it even better than you did before. You kind of have to prep your teams, specifically on the business user side, to be able to take advantage of the powerful tools that they've been given. If I go back to your analogy of the factory settings, if you go and buy, a fancy new part for your car and it's going to help the performance go, but they can't find the button to make it happen, what's the point in getting it in the first place? That's a big advocacy around the training, the change management, the buy-in across the organization. I think it should happen at the same time as the work to make sure that you're continuously improving your craft and making sure that your company can scale with this stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then are there characteristics that are common among brands that do embrace composable that you would identify as they're a good fit? Like you mentioned that there may be, I personally don't know a ton that have kind of moved and regretted it, want to move back, but that's usually because there's a lot of careful deliberation and understanding as they move into it. But you mentioned you have this concept that you call multi, and I'm curious about that for understanding when a company might be a good fit for it.
Yeah, I think this comes back down to the multi use case that we like to refer to is whenever there's more than one of a thing, it starts to indicate where you would have duplicative effort across your organization. If I even just simplify it down to currency or country, selling in multiple countries in many use cases mean that brands run multiple websites. If you change something on your Canadian website, it doesn't change on your US website. Your development team have to then log in and change the thing there too. Promotions, products, imagery, words, anything. So if you scale, the solution is often not just to do more things in more places, but instead try to find a way that simplifies it by saying, well, what if I changed it in one place and it changed in 5? And that really is, one of the core and easiest use cases to think of. But the same applies for many other things. If I have stores and I have online, what about, the promotional campaigns that I want to run in both channels? If I have an app and I have a web, what about my customer data and loyalty program and how I can put it into both channels? Being able to do one thing in one place and affect multiple places in your organization is just a multiplier of efficiency across what you can achieve. And I think that's a good sign. And if I look on the flip side, if you don't have the multi-use cases and if your business case is built around things like we want our website to be faster or we want, our lighthouse score to be good, I would not say they are qualifying reasons for you to go and lift and shift your entire technology strategy across your organization. It's very much so finding some optimization of what you're using today rather than changing it altogether.
If you had to sum it up as the main benefit of composable commerce, what would you say it is?
Speed.